Okay, our final two panels, we have two more. Our first one here is we're going to be talking about the aftermath of World IPv6 Day. So I'm going to turn it right over to Phil Roberts from the Internet Society, and I think he's agreed to even tell you what the Internet Society is if anybody doesn't know. But he's going to. They were one of the major sponsors of World IPv6 Day.
Thanks. Most of the time when we talk, people know who the Internet Society is, or most of the people we talk to know who we are and what we do, but it occurred to me that might not be the case for this audience. So the Internet Society, according to my nephew, we are on the Internet. That's not true. After I disabused him of that notion, the next time he introduced me to somebody he knew, he said, they're sort of like the CIA of the Internet. And I said, no, that's not it either. The Internet Society is a nonprofit company. We have headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and in Reston, Virginia. We were founded in 1992 by Vince Cerf and some of the other key pioneers in Internet technology. And the purpose of the company at the time was to make sure that the Internet grew. So we succeeded. What we concretely do today really is work in three areas predominantly. We work in the area of public policy. We work with a lot of intergovernmental or non-governmental organizations that have some say or some influence over how the Internet works. We do work in development around the world. We work in areas where there is still a need for growth of the Internet. We do a lot of work in the developing world there. And we do work in standards and technology, and this ranges into all sorts of things that my boss likes to refer to as helping broccoli technology, helping the Internet adopt and use technologies that are good for it, but that maybe don't taste all that great up front. And certainly our work in IPv6 is one of those. We're also the institutional home for, the organizational home for the IETF. The IETF is the standards body that sets standards for the Internet, and we provide the organizational legal backing for them. So that's what the Internet Society is about, and I work there. So what was World IPv6 Day? For 24 hours, June 8th, set from 0 to 2359 UTC, many websites around the world made their main website reachable over IPv6. The lead names on this were Google, Facebook, and Yahoo. And in fact, the top 5 most visited websites in the world were all reachable over IPv6 for that period of time. There were a couple of goals of this. One of the main ideas was to motivate the industry, the entire industry, to see that IPv6 is for real. When the leading brands of the Internet, Google, Facebook, and Yahoo, say they're going to do something, people notice. And we saw the effect on ISPs, we saw the effect on software vendors, on hardware vendors, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the effect of other people who joined in to do this. But certainly it did motivate the world, motivate the Internet industry to see that IPv6 is for real and that people are taking it seriously and that it's not really any longer in its infancy. Second motivation was to understand what issues still need to be addressed to ensure a successful transition. And I think Igor is going to talk about that some from a Yahoo point of view. But certainly the expectation was not that when we did this, the Internet would crash. The expectation was that IPv6 is mature. The standards have been around for a while. People have been deploying it for a long time. The only reason we could do this is because it is fairly widely deployed, at least in carrier networks. And we expected it to succeed. This has been done before. Certainly a lot of people have been running IPv6 on their websites for a long time. ISOC has been running it on its website for a few years. But a notable example was Heise in Germany last fall. www.heise.de did the exact same thing. They turned it on for 24 hours, turned it off, examined the effects, and a few months later turned it on permanently. So This was global, large scale, and it seemed to have an impact on the industry. So when we started talking about this, the way this came about was from some discussions that we were having with ISPs. And we were trying to get at the issue of, why don't you guys just start rolling out IPv6? What's the issue? And one of the things that they pointed out was that they had pushback in their management channels from people who said, yeah, we can deploy IPv6 for our end users, but at this point it's kind of pointless because there's nothing for them to consume. Our end users spend a lot of time on Google, Facebook, and Yahoo, and if none of those are reachable over IPv6, why do we want to roll it out? So the idea was to get 4 or 5 big websites to do this for about a week, and it ended up being for just 24 hours, but we did get 4 or 5 big websites to agree to do it. So ISPs clearly took note of this, and they now see that these large websites are moving in this direction, and even though it was only on for 24 hours, it's pretty clear that this is not the kind of effort that you undertake if you're just going to throw it all away. This isn't something you do just for fun or as an exercise or as an afterthought or as a science project. It's something that's clearly on the path to regular deployment, and ISPs noticed this. So thanks to the big website owners for stepping up and really breaking the chicken and egg problem for IPv6 deployment. The second thing that was very important to the big website owners was improving v6 connectivity, and I think Igor is going to talk about this some, but the idea here is that there's a lot of phantom v6 connectivity out there. As a percentage, it isn't much, but if you have hundreds of millions of visitors to your website every day, it adds up to something that's more significant than you're willing to cope with. So the hope was that by doing this, IPv6 connectivity would be improved. And certainly some steps were taken to improve it before the day, and steps are going to continue to be taken to improve it, and we believe that there are further fixes in flight. It served as a target date for people to shoot for. All of the registrations for websites who wanted to participate in this event came through me. I processed all of them. I heard from about 1,100 different organizations, and a lot of them would send along a note about why they were doing this. We're doing this. And they said, it's great that you've set a date for us to do this. It's great to have a deadline. And it was completely artificial, right? I mean, we could have picked June 9th. We started out thinking we were going to do it on June 6th, but it gave people a date to shoot for, and that was important. And they did treat it as a deadline. Many of them just turned it on as soon as they could before that deadline. And one company contacted me with 1 hour left and said, we turned it on, we made it. And sure enough, our monitors saw it. So people did treat it as a deadline, and it gave them something to shoot for, and that was important. It helped to spur organizations to create a plan for doing this. Not everybody was able to get there, and we knew that. People have lots of dependencies, lots of things that are in the way, lots of requirements for supporting their service, and we knew not everybody would get there. But many people created a plan, and it was a tremendous draw for people to want to be able to be seen doing the same thing that the major internet brands were doing on a day. A lot of people contacted us and said, we want to be on the list with Google, Facebook, and Yahoo. I even had one company that said, we want to be on the list behind Google, but in front of Facebook and Yahoo. Can you do that? So, no, I'm not going to do that. So, and the last thing that's important to talk about is that this is a great example of the internet collaborating. In one of the earlier panels, somebody said there is no regulatory body that governs the internet. There are a lot of people who would like to say something about what goes on the internet, but the internet runs because a bunch of people get together and make it run, make it work every day without any controlling body or oversight organization. And this is a great example of the industry coming together and saying, it's in our interest for the internet to transition to IPv6, and this is the step that we're going to take to make that happen. So this was a wonderful example of that. There was a global response. The initial commitment was from Google, Facebook, and Yahoo. Content delivery networks were also in from the beginning. Akamai and Limelight said, yeah, we'll support this. And we had interest from websites, ISPs, hosting companies, exchanges, vendors around the world. Over 1,000 organizations contacted us, and thousands of websites turned on IPv6 for 24 hours. Many of the organizations that contacted us had already been running IPv6 for some time on their main website. Many of them turned it on leading up to it. Many of them who turned it on left it on. And I'll give you some numbers in a little bit that kind of surprised me in terms of sites that participated. So these are the real big ones. Google, Facebook, YouTube, Yahoo. Blogger was in there too. I should have updated that. So the top 5 most visited websites were on Yahoo Japan, Bing, Microsoft. These are all big properties. And again, it was important that people saw this and saw that these are big brands doing this, and this is clearly showing that a direction is going for IPv6 deployment. If you were in Korea, also some very big local sites participated. Naver and Dom both participated. They're the number 1 and number 4 most visited websites in Korea. The others are worldwide sites. I don't know if it's Google, Facebook, but those kinds of properties. But these are the major local properties. If you were in the Czech Republic, these are major local properties. The biggest property in the Czech Republic owns all of these, and they didn't put their main website up. But they'd been working on this for a while, and when this was announced, they said, oh yeah, we're going to do this anyway. This gives us a great date to shoot for to get some of our stuff up and get some experience. If you were in Brazil, there were some big local websites. There were also some big websites in Portugal and Indonesia, in various other parts of the world, in Japan. Almost all of the U.S. government agencies participated in this, and I just put up a sampling of them so you can see. But over time, they contacted me and said, yes, we're going to do that. And the ones that are up here that are in green have left it on. Veterans Affairs had it running a little bit before we started, and they just left it on. Census left it on. Education and Energy. I checked these about a few days afterwards, before I made these slides for NANOG, and then I rechecked them to make sure the stats were still current, and they are. And I talked to somebody at Census, and their plan is just to leave it on, and at this point it gives them a way to drive their vendors to support a product quality deployment. One of the early companies that contacted me, so whenever somebody contacted me and said, yeah, I want to make my website reachable, I would look them up on Alexa and see how popular they were. I wanted to know what the really big ones were when they came in, and somebody contacted me, and they were the 1,000,000th most popular website or something like that. And I thought, okay, so they don't get a whole lot of visitors. And I thought, we'll get 400 websites, and we had about 400 websites on our list. So out of 1 million, we got 400. So, but hosting companies started contacting me, and I heard from a hosting company, and he said, I'm going to stand up about 1,800 websites. I said, oh, that's good. And I called the guy. I said, let's talk about this. There's this problem with brokenness. He said, yeah, I studied it. I know what it is. And so he turned up his 1,800, and somebody else contacted me and said, I'm going to turn up a few thousand. And I contacted him. He said, yeah, I've studied it. I know what the issues are. I'm going to do it anyway. So I quit calling people when they did that. But I asked a bunch of the hosting companies to tell me how many sites they stood up, and several of them did, but a lot of them didn't want to say how many. But these are all companies that stood up a lot of sites and said, this is how many that's on. Host in Moldova had about 4,500 they were already up and running. Task in Brazil turned on about 7,000, and they left it on. And Domain Factory in Europe contacted me and said, we're going to turn on our websites for this. I've got about 700,000. So they turned up 700,000 domains. They turned them off after 24 hours. I talked to the woman. She said, yeah, we had 4 trouble tickets on IPv6 for the day, and it turns out one of them wasn't really IPv6. So we're probably just going to turn it on, and on the 4th of July, we're going to turn them on and leave them on. And they turned up 800,000 domains on the 4th of July. And Strato in Germany turned on 4 million and left them on. So when you think about all of the websites that are out there that can be visited, there is a bit of a long tail. But when these hosting companies turn it on and make it on by default, it starts to solve the long tail of content. So it's pretty clear that the big websites are headed there. They have their time frames for getting there. But it's also clear that even small websites will be reachable via IPv6 through the efforts of hosting and content provider companies. So, was it a success? Yeah, I think it was a great success. Improved connectivity. Large websites are really keeping track of the quality of connection to them over IPv6, and I think Igor will talk about that some. Participating websites, we had a lot. Like I said, some of these hosting companies made the list of 400 seem small in terms of a number of sites that participated. But we kept a dashboard that said whether or not sites were actually reachable. Of course, the longer-term goal is for folks to permanently turn up IPv6, and for some they did on the day. Some will do it somewhat soon, and some have a longer timeline. We know that the timelines for doing this vary. But of the sites that we monitored, 2/3 of the participating sites just left it on afterwards. So we're still tracking them, and they've just left it on, and many of them have said, yeah, we're not going to turn it off. So, and traffic increased and remained higher. IPE Labs measured this, and I've got a URL for a site where they described this, but we noticed the traffic went up on the day, and it stayed higher. So that's a good effect. Increasing IPv6 traffic is good. So what's next? Well, clearly more websites need to enable IPv6 permanently. Large websites are still somewhat inhibited by phantom IPv6 connectivity, but also large websites often have a lot of dependencies. They've got their own code that enables things. They depend on hosting companies or content providing companies, and often behind a simple URL there will be quite a lot of complexity. And it takes a while to get there, so there are issues with getting there. End users, there's still very few end users with reliable IPv6 connectivity. It's up to large ISPs to change this. I wish large ISPs would talk about this more. I know that there are lots of plans that are in flight. I don't have a lot of specifics. I'm not free to talk about it, but clearly, if you're really going to move the needle for IPv6 deployment, it's up to those ISPs that have millions of end users to do something about it. And the industry still needs to collaborate on getting IPv6 deployed in a quality manner throughout the internet, through every system, every piece of software, everything that the internet touches. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, our next speaker is Igor Gashinsky from Yahoo, who's going to talk a little bit about their experience with.
Hi, my name is Igor Gashinsky, and I'm a principal architect with Yahoo, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what our view was on World IPv6 Day. So first, a quick thank you to ISOC for actually organizing this, to RIPE for all the monitoring, to Google Chrome and Firefox teams who've done a lot of work on trying to address the broken user issues, and everybody who's participated, and otherwise also all the people who actually tried to make IPv6 into something workable, which I guess the work started in 1992 and now it's 2011 and we're finally almost there. So why did we do it? As Phil was saying, we had two major motivations. One was to promote IPv6 adoption and to break the chicken and the egg paradigm. ISPs are saying there is no content on v6, so what's the point of deploying it to users? Content providers are saying there is no v6 user, so what's the point of deploying it on content? So we finally said, all right, let's do it. Here's your content. Can we get some users now, please? Also, this was our last-ditch effort to help with a broken user problem, and it's been discussed a little bit earlier today, but basically it's when a user goes to a website, they make if they're v6 enabled in some way, shape, or form, they make a quad A query and an A query, and if they get a quad A query back, quad A query answered, then they will actually attempt to connect to a website over IPv6. For a portion of the users, they think they have v6 connectivity. It doesn't work. They will still try to connect over IPv6. Depending which operating system they use, they will wait either 21 seconds, 75 seconds, or forever to retry and fall back to v4. From perspective of a content provider, if the user is trying to get to your page and after about 10 seconds of seeing that spinning thing going in their browser, they hit stop, they go to your next competitor. Why that happens? Well, statistics have shown that about 20% of all 64 connectivity is completely and utterly broken. In fact, there's an effort in IETF right now to deprecate 64 as a protocol and get it off the internet. Also, there's a couple of operating systems that in the old days preferred 64 even if your PC has a RFC 1918 address, and 64 cannot traverse NATs, so that was awesome. And there's a bunch of devices that pretended to have V6 connectivity, like your Linksys of the world and whatnot, advertise arrays into the home network, but they had no V6 connectivity upstream. So that right now accounts for about 0.22% of the internet. The number about 2 years ago was 0.078. It was about 3 times higher. Now you may look at this number and say 0.022%, who cares, just do it. Well, sure, if you have 1 million users, that's a pretty low number for you. If you have 700 million or 1 billion users, that's 130,000 to 220,000 people who you just took off the internet. That's a lot of users. And that was the other part of the chicken and the egg paradigm is if Yahoo is the only one who did this, well, user goes to Yahoo, Yahoo looks down to him, he goes to Google, goes, Yahoo sucks. Not something that we wanted to do. The goal, or one of the major benefits to us of World IPv6 Day was user goes to Yahoo, Yahoo's down. User goes to Google, Google's down. User goes to Facebook to tell all their friends that Yahoo and Google are down. Oh wait, he can't get there too. Maybe it's me. Maybe I should call somebody. And we were hoping that World IPv6 Day was actually going to cause that reaction and get people to, well, fix themselves. So what do we actually do? Yahoo has a lot of markets for our front page presence. 37 we basically picked one platform for a front page, and there were 37 markets on that platform. And we opted in all of those markets into World IPv6 Day. So anybody visiting Yahoo US, Mexico, Canada, or all these other locations, they were going to get a V6 front page. Those markets are actually served out of, for IPv4, served out of 10 front page serving sites. But it was an interesting panel on security today. We actually have been working on getting V6 deployed into our network from about 2008. I looked at some of our plans in 2009 that called for a deployment being complete in 2010. Mass deployment hasn't actually started because we found some pretty major security issues with a lot of vendor equipment. And we decided that we couldn't risk our data centers because of those issues. So we actually have a proxy infrastructure that sits in front of Yahoo that terminates all user connections for performance reasons. And 7 of the locations where that infrastructure was on gear that didn't have the security issues. So we're like, okay, that's actually good enough of a deployment. So we we dual stacked those proxy locations in order to serve IPv6 traffic and also IPv4 traffic. The software that's used for this is what's called the Yahoo Traffic Server. We've actually open sourced that about 1.5 years ago. It's now called the Apache Traffic Server. That's the software that we use to handle any and all translation. If you want to take a similar methodology, go right ahead. We've tested this at our scale. And we run a lot of traffic through this thing. So we basically dual stack these locations, and when the user terminated on these locations, they were on V6. When those locations spoke to those 10 data centers, they were on V4, but from a user perspective, they were terminating at Yahoo over IPv6. So what do we do to prepare the infrastructure? Well, first of all, we turned up 64 return relay on all of our backbone and serving locations. We saw that caused about 140 millisecond performance improvement than if you are not having that. So if your ISP says that we have 64 return tunnel infrastructure and you don't need to worry about that, I would advise you to test those claims yourselves, because we were told that many times too. And it worked, except packet from California to New York was traveling either via Germany or Amsterdam. Needless to say, that's not optimal performance. We obviously dual stacked our front-end proxy infrastructure. We had to modify a lot of code. This was the real Y2K for us. Every application that deals with end user from a targeting, ad targeting, geo, everything had to be touched because 32-bit values don't fit a 128-bit address. And we actually started the network infrastructure effort in 2008. It has taken us better part of a year to get the abuse, geo, and ad targeting up to par. It is a lot of work. We've also over-provisioned IPv6 serving capacity by a factor of 1,000. You might say that's kind of crazy, but given how little IPv6 traffic there was, it was hard for us not to do that, just because what our smallest building block is. Capacity tends to cover up for a lot of mistakes. So in case you start doing something outside the optimal path, if you're over-provisioned by 1,000, who cares? But all of that was actually the easy part. Once we did all that, we ran 2 50-minute tests before the event. We learned some good lessons along the way. So the first test that we ran was at 2 p.m. At 10 p.m. Pacific time, and we were measuring. We started a test in our low traffic period just to make sure that if something broke, it wouldn't impact as many people as during peak traffic period. And first thing we realized was, yeah, we're monitoring everything, but we're not monitoring over IPv6. Because of that, our GSLB system shifted traffic around in ways we didn't expect. So it was a good thing that we ran that test. Then we ran another test. We launched it at 2 p.m. Pacific time, which is our peak traffic period. And we saw a 7% traffic decline, like right as we turned this on. Everybody started going, holy crap, well, what did we just do? What did we break? Do we need to roll back? Until we looked at our week-over-week graphs and, oh, we have a 7% traffic decline at exactly 5 p.m. every other week and every other day. And apparently, there's a lot of people who, at 5 o'clock, leave work. On the dot, apparently. So the other lesson that we learned was that you never want to do anything at a traffic inflection point. For the actual World IPv6 day, we didn't start on 00. We started 17 minutes before the hour, and we ended 13 minutes after the hour. Why we picked those numbers? They're prime. It's just one of those things that we've learned for probably the third or fourth time not to do anything on the hour or on the 15-minute mark, because something usually happens at that time, whether it's a cron job that starts gzipping your logs or whatnot. So we also did some preparation of the users. We did a lot of user education and outreach. We actually had beacons going off of our homepage that probe the users for whether their V6 was working or not. And if not, we had a window shade at the very top that said, hey, we think you have a connectivity problem. Please click here to go to our help center to then run through our IPv6 test page. We also had IPv6 help pages in 38 languages. And we had an IPv6 test tool over there, and we did a lot of user outreach. We did that, again, hoping to shrink the number of broken users as a result of it. So what actually happened? Well, we think the day was a huge success. It's a great example of industry collaboration and moving towards IPv6 adoption. The internet didn't melt down. That was a really good thing. It was one of the most anticlimactic war rooms ever. I haven't been in the NOC in like 6 years prior to that. We actually had a bunch of our architects sitting in the NOC, making sure that if something was going to go wrong, the final escalation was going to be the first escalation. Nothing really happened. We had a minor traffic optimization issue where we redirected some UK users to the east coast of US because of some misconfiguration with the GSLB, but we fixed that pretty quickly. We also had a line card break on us in a really weird way. It was probably the fastest mean time to repair ever on any sort of a hardware outage, because we saw the outage, all the alarms went up, and two people who would have been escalated to by escalation's escalation were sitting right there. We're like, oh, done, okay, fixed. We also saw no significant increase in call center volume. We attribute that to all the outreach that we did, the help pages, and everything else. Well, this is actually kind of funny. So we were monitoring a lot of social media, and Twitter was not a site that participated in World IPv6 Day, but that's a good thing, because anybody who is broken could actually complain about it on something. So this is a Twitter feed from a user, and I'm going to read this in case you can't. He's going, "I'll soon be throwing this MacBook out the window. Work, you fool. Twitter is good, but so is Flickr, but I want other websites too." This is what users think of IPv6. They don't care. They just want things to work. And this is an example of a broken user who is thinking of throwing a laptop out the window. And a little while later, the user, finally fixes himself after realizing that there's all the press outreach that it is World IPv6 Day, and the user says, "Woohoo! I have defeated this IPv6 thing," which again goes to show you the user doesn't care whether it's IPv4, IPv6, IPv8, IPv12. It doesn't matter. They just want IP connectivity. IPv6 is not a selling point. It's plumbing. You want water. You don't quite care how it gets to you. And it's kind of sad when we're fighting our users. So some statistics. Well, we served over 2.2 million users over IPv6 on that day. We had over 1 million visits to our IPv6 help pages. At peak, we saw 0.229% users being IPv6 enabled on our site, and average was 0.168%. France was a leader with actually 3.4% of IPv6 enabled users. Most of that is thanks to Free.fr, who are probably the largest eyeball ISP out there who have v6 deployed. US was at roughly 1/10 of that at 0.35%, which is kind of sad. Unfortunately, the breakage stats remained the same after the event, so it doesn't look like we made a significant dent on the broken user problem. Another interesting statistical tidbit, 30% of all IPv6 hits by volume were actually our own monitoring traffic. You could say that we monitor too much, but for IPv4, we don't notice, and we monitor just as much. So this just goes to show you there's really not that much IPv6 eyeballs out there. These are our per hour statistics. They cut off at 10 p.m. just because I haven't updated this graph, so sorry, but it just shows a continuous decline. This is per region breakdown. As you can see, Europe is showing a somewhat diurnal pattern, whereas Asia and the US basically shows there's almost no IPv6 enabled users there. The top users by country, France by far led the pack, followed by US, and then Great Britain, Germany, etc. Those are the top 10, and this presentation is going to be available so you can download it. These are the users per country per hour. It's actually kind of interesting what was happening in France. It looks like people have v6 at work, but more of them have v6 at home. So you could see right around 6 o'clock, v6 drops as people are commuting home, and then v6 picks back up as people get home. The interesting thing to look at over here, this is just a zoom in of that. Those green dots, that's UK. And what you're seeing is an inverse of a typical pattern, and that's because the number of v6 users in UK stayed the same throughout the day. Which basically means that it's websites and other types of spider traffic, so not significant amount of humans using v6 there. We've got some by country and OS breakdowns, and also by browser. There's a disproportionate amount of Linux in Germany. What this tells you is that most of the traffic are basically geeks like us, which completely shows you that there is no real eyeball penetration at home. And there's a similar thing here by browser. So conclusion, that was a lot of work for 0.229%. I'm going to repeat, 0.229%. So when people ask, when are we going to do this again? When are we going to make it stick for real? Can we at least break a single-digit percentage? So for the people who are saying that V6, there is no V6 content, give us some users, please. And on that, that's pretty much all I have.
Great, thank you. Okay, so if you've been paying attention, our next speaker is going to look familiar. Chris Donnelly from Cable Labs has generously agreed to step in. John Brzozowski from Comcast had a last-minute issue and was unable to be with us, so Chris has agreed to step in for him, and we really appreciate him doing that on very short notice. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you. So as we've been talking about in the previous two panels, or two speakers, this was about turning on IPv6 content on websites. So why were the service providers interested? Well, first of all, the cable MSOs have been preparing for the IPv6 transition for over 5 years now. We've worked with them to build IPv6 support into DOCSIS 3.0 back in 2006 and Packet Cable 2.0 specifications. And we've been working with the operators ever since on how to operationalize IPv6, how to make sure that it worked properly in their networks. And so World IPv6 Day was a great opportunity to test the preparations that we've been doing for so many years. As Phil mentioned, this was a rallying point for IPv6 efforts. It was a hard deadline that everybody could show to the people within their organizations about coordinating some of the work that was going on around IPv6. It was also a low-impact test for the monitoring of customer care systems that the service providers have been building and standing up, and they've been educating their customer care organizations for quite some time. Also, it allowed for localized experiments with some of these transition technologies. With all the content that was available on World IPv6 Day, some of the operators took it upon themselves to test some ingenious fixes to the problems that we've seen with 6-4, for example, through work they could do on their own networks. And World IPv6 Day was going to affect ISPs whether or not they prepared. As we've talked about with the 6-4 tunnels and with the Teredo issues, people are already running IPv6 on your networks, whether you've turned it on or not. So the cable operators worked very closely together to prepare for the technical challenges that would be experienced on that day. Also, this was an opportunity to increase IPv6 traffic and to see how the networks behaved with the IPv6 load. There is significant interest among a number of different cable operators in IPv6 and in transitioning to IPv6. So this was a very important milestone on that road. So to prepare for World IPv6 Day, Cable Labs had IPv6 weekly calls with our cable operator members on the technical issues that we expected for World IPv6 Day. We looked to identify potential problems and troubleshooting steps so that we could offer customers the best possible experience. We also developed a customer care FAQ talking about specifically how to diagnose and troubleshoot any issues that subscribers would be facing during World IPv6 Day. Also, as Igor mentioned, there is a testipv6.com website that will identify which users have good IPv6 support and which ones have challenges. And the source code for this is open source, so a number of operators stood up test IPv6 websites of their own to identify negatively affected subscribers, and more importantly, to follow up with them about how to fix their issues so that they would be ready for World IPv6 Day. Also, we worked with the cable operators to put out a World IPv6 Day press release. We wanted to talk to subscribers in advance to let everybody know what was coming and what they needed to expect on June 8th. And we briefed the NCTA and MSO PR representatives so that if any issues did occur on World IPv6 Day, they knew what to say and what the challenges were ahead of times. Cable Labs also hosted a rapid response conference bridge on World IPv6 Day for a number of our members. In case any problems did show up, we wanted to be able to identify and resolve them as quickly as possible. And as Igor said, this was a very, very quiet war room. It was more about checking the publicity and checking which sites were reachable than solving any technical issues. Some MSOs also prepared on their networks to set up 6-to-4 relays to mitigate some of the user brokenness problems with traffic getting sent all over the world for sites just across town. World IPv6 Day was very successful. My son came to me on World IPv6 Day and heard the coverage on NPR and said, "Daddy, it's World IPv6 Day, how do we celebrate?" Well, not having a lot of problems was very good for me. We saw IPv6 traffic levels increase on MSO networks as much as 10-fold, depending on the operator. Some operators that had higher traffic levels to begin with saw lesser increases, but it was significant across the board. More importantly, call center volumes were normal. There were significantly fewer than expected IPv6 calls. We had predicted before the event that it would be somewhere on the order of 250 calls per million subscribers, give or take. After the event, we compared notes, and the number was much closer to 50 calls per million subscribers. And anecdotal evidence says that a lot of those were customers hearing about World IPv6 Day and calling up saying, "What is this IPv6? How do I get involved? How do I get more access at my home?" So there were very few problems experienced. One ISP out in Iowa said that they received a total of 3 calls, and 2 of them were educational. And IPv6 traffic remained high even after World IPv6 Day. Many of the content providers left IPv6 enabled even after the event. And looking at the graphs, we saw that the IPv6 traffic actually increased over that weekend. So the traffic from June 11th through 13th was higher than it was on June 8th. So I want to take a moment to really thank Phil and Igor and the folks at Facebook and Google as well for setting up World IPv6 Day. It was a huge success. It's a very important milestone on the path to IPv6, but we still have a lot of work to do. If we look at IPv6 steadily improving over time, we'll see that the experience will improve for the end users as the ecosystem continues to add support, as the content providers turn on more IPv6 content, as the service providers offer more IPv6 access to more subscribers, and as the device manufacturers increase the level of IPv6 support in customer devices. At the same time, IPv4 is running out, and the IPv4 internet after IPv4 exhaustion is going to be different than the IPv4 internet that we're used to today. We are going to see some deployments of carrier-grade NAT in some cases, and that will negatively affect the customer experience over time. So in that interim, as the IPv4 experience is impacted by carrier-grade NAT, but before IPv6 has been fully deployed throughout the ecosystem, there will be an experience gap for some subscribers. But what happens if we delay IPv6 deployment? Notice that the experience gap now gets both wider and deeper. We really want to offer the best possible experience that we can to all subscribers, and the path moving forward is to do this using IPv6 and to roll that out as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple questions for these folks. We sort of set it up that way, but I want to, if anytime any of you have questions, I'm going to give yours priority, step up to the mic, and we'll go right there. Okay, so first thing I want to ask is, we talked about, what a service provider, what a content provider, and what the Internet Society learned from this. I'm going to ask our speakers if they can tell me what they think enterprises learned from World IPv6 Day, and how that day may have or may not have influenced their preparation for the transition to IPv6. So Phil, you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, I think that enterprises. So the term enterprise encompasses a lot of different kinds of operations, but certainly for an enterprise whose employees depend upon things that are going on outside of their network, things that are going on outside of whatever they're using internally in terms of tools. They may have seen an uptick in IPv6 related things on June 8th because people sitting at their desks do occasionally visit Google and even Facebook. I don't know if you're sitting at your desk at work and can't get to Facebook, if you call your IT department and say there's a problem, but clearly there's the same kind of sort of phantom connectivity issues in enterprises that there are in ISPs, and my guess is that some of them probably noticed that. Certainly, there are, we talked to people in various enterprises who said they were making some of the same kind of preparations that ISPs were making to make sure that, if they had a large network with a lot of users, that they would anticipate this kind of thing going on. So,
okay, Igor or Chris, any thoughts about that?
Sure. I think the enterprises, they don't have much of a choice. They will have to deploy IPv6 because realistically, they're going to need to grow. And in order to grow, they're going to need to do IPv6. As far as what lessons they could learn, I think as Brandon said earlier, test, and test some more. There's a lot of equipment out there that says it's IPv6 capable. The vendors will swear up and down that it works. You get it in your lab, and then you find out that sure, it works for 200 packets per second. You put 201st packet per second, and the piece of equipment goes boom. I hope that's a lesson that everybody takes to heart, because it's not quite plug and play.
I think one other thing that enterprises can learn from this test is that the internet will work in a dual stack environment. Across the board, we saw very few problems from end users, whether they had IPv6 explicitly enabled or not. Going forward and looking at your networks, you don't need to be scared of the protocol. You don't need to be scared that turning on IPv6 is going to break your network and break IPv4. So the real message here is come on in, the water's fine.
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about website owners. What major roadblocks do you think, any of you think remain to keep website owners from permanently enabling IPv6? We heard that a lot of folks turned it on and, as you said, found it was fairly safe and didn't turn it off or decided to just leave it on permanently. What are the roadblocks? And Igor, why don't we start this one with you? What are the major roadblocks? I think you've already identified one. Nobody cares. Give you some users and you'll worry about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that nobody cares. It's there's very few IBO providers out there, especially in the US, that provide IPv6 service. I think the other huge roadblock to large-scale deployment is the broken user problem. From what we've noticed when we ran a day's worth of tests, and 130,000 people, according to our numbers, couldn't get to Yahoo, Google, and Facebook. Maybe because we only did it for a day, they just went outside to play and decided that screw it, I'll try tomorrow, or my internet is down, maybe somebody will fix it the next day. So maybe the next lesson is that the next time we do this, we should do it for a lot longer. But 130,000 users who worked just fine yesterday, but you broke by enabling IPv6 is a pretty major roadblock, at least for me.
Okay, that makes sense. Chris, any thoughts about that?
Another thing in rolling out IPv6 to end users, we talked about turning on more service provider networks. We also need to look at consumer electronics, making sure that Alana's new flat screen smart TV will support IPv6 in the future, and also the game consoles and the Blu-ray players and the webcams and all the other non-PCs in the customer houses that now have Yahoo widgets or Netflix service or whatever else also have IPv6 support.
But if I can add, so there's a lot of websites out there who don't have a billion users, who only have 10,000, 100,000. For people who have just 10,000 users, that means you're going to break maybe 5 people. They'll call you. For those people, we've open sourced the software that we use to enable dual stack. It's been tested at our scale. It works. Go download it, install it. There's not much of a reason for you not to be using it.
Okay, fair enough. John, you have a question.
John Curran, President and CEO, Aaron. So I attended a IPv6 World Day post-mortem sort of presentation at one of the conferences, and one of the big cable companies said, we were standing by our phones waiting for the calls from people who were misconfigured, had v6 almost turned on but not really configured, and sounds of crickets chirping. So I matched that up with Igor, your statement that says 130,000 people didn't get the page they were hoping for that day because they couldn't get there. And I'm trying to figure out, well, that's a lot of people going outside and playing, but I guess that could be what it is. If World IPv6 Day ran 3 days or 7 days or 5 days, how many days does it have to run so that those people notice there's a problem and fix it themselves or call their provider or get on the phone so that 130,000 ends up being 10,000 really broken ones at the end of the period? How many days do we have to go?
So I think about a week.
About a week?
That's completely anecdotal evidence, because I've seen my parents' internet not work for 3 days before they finally decide, all right, I'm going to spend 3 hours on hold, I'm going to finally call.
And I guess the second question is, if you went a week and that 130,000 dropped to 10 or maybe 5 or whatever, why would you switch back at the end of the week?
You probably wouldn't.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Well, the only possible answer would be, right now, the only way we had of measuring brokenness was to actually measure when we didn't have v6 enabled. So you might turn off for a day, measure, you see, okay, we're at 4 nines availability. That's exactly what we're shooting for. Good enough, let's go.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question about like the content providers, and if we start having ISP natting, you're going to lose a lot of information and to be able to log like who's using the web page, and it's going to be commingled with a lot of other stuff. So is that a big incentive for the content providers, or does that not really matter that much because you use different tracking mechanisms on the web pages?
Honestly, the primary incentive for content providers to go to IPv6 isn't that there's going to be some IPv6 only users out there soon, because it's probably not going to be that soon. The biggest incentive is going to be to bypass the broken NAT devices. Because I think there was I don't remember the name of the person who asked, why can't vendors make good stateful devices that don't break? For anybody who uses load balancers in your network, a couple of months ago we had to troubleshoot an issue where on every 8th packet, every packet that had the SYN bit on it the IP address was written backwards. These are the issues that we troubleshoot with load balancers. The NAT gateways are load balancers in reverse. So if you think you have issues troubleshooting users now, wait till you have those NAT devices in the way.
Okay, I think that we're going to make this our final question for the panel.
Well, it's more a comment, suggestion. It seems like nothing concentrates the mind like a deadline, you know. So this seems like a good thing to do again. And there's a couple dates thrown around on the table that might be a good. The U.S. government has a mandate. I think it's September next year. If Ron Brosma is in the room. September, yeah. To have all public-facing government websites in the U.S. IPv6 enabled. So there's a mandate for some major content provider. It might be a good idea to look at things like that going on around the world and see if there's another date next year that makes sense, and to focus on the eyeball side of it and say, hey, look, all these content providers are lining up to do this again next year. Let's all get on board.
Yeah, those conversations started about 3 days afterwards, after we finished processing the numbers. We being the people who participated in the first one have a date in our mind. It's not been agreed on, and I think, as Phil can tell you, getting the PR release out for the first World IPv6 Day was a major nightmare. So, because it takes a lot of coordination from everybody. So I think when we finish through that PR nightmare the second time around, but yes, there's already a date in mind that's being thrown around for the second event, and it's sooner than the U.S. government one.
Okay, please join me in thanking our panel.